Hello everyone and welcome to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 5 Countdown video. Today our analysts will be listing the top 5 compositions for patch 11.13. If there's one word to describe the 11.13 meta, it would be vertical. Traits like Redeem, Dawnbringer, and Forgotten are just too darn good. But don't worry, there's other playable compositions as well, so let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our top 5, we have Rangers coming in as the number 5 composition. Before we delve into the Ranger composition, let's first point out that there's a fairly distinct gap between the 5th and 4th place comps in our top 5 and the rest of the top 3. This is because vertical traits are absolutely dominating the meta. That's not to say builds like 4 Rangers are severely weaker than those boards, but it's much harder to place in the top 2 with Ranger than Redeemed, for example. That said, Rangers are doing well in the current meta. There's a few reasons for this, most notably is the fact that a lot of champions and traits were nerfed slightly in 11.13. Because of that, the power of builds using these champions and traits went down enough for Rangers to once again become a viable composition. Another reason is that 2 Ranger was buffed, so while 4 Ranger is the go-to for the trait, you can flex into other variations if needed. Aphelios has also received another minor buff, which over the course of the last few patches has slowly bumped him back to being a viable carry. As for the exact composition for Rangers, well, it varies. Aphelios is the main carry you want to aim for in the mid to late game, but you can rely on Ashe or Varus as item holders. Vayne is alright early game, but she's specific to Forgotten more so than Rangers. Varus is also mainly seen with Redeemed, but does hold Aphelios items well, the issue being that you have to commit to items for Aphelios as Varus and Redeemed uses vastly different items. In general, you want any frontline you can get your hands on with Rangers, as stalling out the enemy frontline is the key to winning. Knights can do this with Taric and Darius being the most important, as well as Cavaliers with Rel being essential. It's also fine to dip into other synergies such as 4 Nightbringer with Aphelios or 3 Redeemed to beef up Leona and Rel. Basically, you can mix and match as needed, just keep in mind that you need your frontline upgraded. The main downsides to Ranger is the fact that they have a weak stage 4. This is because you really need level 8 to put together your full board with Rangers, and you need to hit Aphelios too. On average, this leads to difficulties in stage 4. Another issue with Rangers is that they're relatively squishy, so you have to be very diligent in scouting and positioning. All in all though, as far as AD compositions go, Rangers are one of the better options in the meta. Let's move on to the number 4 composition, Skirmishers. Skirmishers are back. Skirmishers received several buffs in patch 11.13, including a rework to Nidalee and Trundle, Kennen buffs, Jax buffs, and a buff to 6 Skirmishers. That's a lot for one patch, so it's not surprising to see them rise back up in the meta. Of course, they do still suffer from being a composition that mostly reaches the top 4 and not the top 2, but consistency is the key to being in our top 5, and Skirmishers are exactly that. The playstyle of Skirmishers is relatively unchanged, as you want to quickly get to 6 of the trait during stage 3 and 4 while looking for Jax 2. The main difference for Skirmishers in patch 11.13 is that Nidalee is playable as a carry. Eventually, you do want to swap over to Jax as the main damage dealer, but running Nidalee throughout the game is perfectly fine to do. It also opens up more flexible boards in stage 2 and 3 with Dawnbringer. It's worth noting that Trundle is a bit weaker than he was previously, at least in terms of instantly wrecking an enemy frontliner. He's still useful, but don't expect him to instantly kill other players' 3-star Hecarim with just a Trundle 1. Lee Sin, Pantheon, and Kennen are still the backbone of the composition, providing the much-needed utility and defensive capabilities. In late game, there's also the option of running Viego. Jax has not changed much, though you can be flexible with his items. Runen is still one of the best items, but you can flex into others, including Guardian Angel, RFC, Last Whisper, and both variations of Bloodthirster and Quicksilver. This means you're not hard locked into playing Skirmisher if you find another composition to pivot into, since Jax items are flexible. The last thing to discuss is what you should play alongside 6 Skirmishers. Much like other vertical traits, it depends on the lobby. Mystic is always a potential splash trait, as is Ironclad, since Jax is an Ironclad himself. Or Dragon Slayer isn't as important, but it can be helpful if you put several items on either Pantheon or Trundle. At the end of the day, what you play in addition to 6 Skirmishers is up to you and the lobby you're in. Now we're at the point where there's a sizable gap between the 5th and 4th place compositions and the rest. Both Skirmisher and Ranger do just fine in the meta, but the next 3 compositions are on another level. Coming in at number 3, we have Forgotten. Forgotten took a bit of a tumble after the 11-13 changes to the trait and the nerf to Rise. But in reality, the trait is still going strong, it's just a bit weaker at times, particularly against the other 2 meta compositions we'll be covering next. What makes Forgotten so strong is how easily you can get to 6 Forgotten. Because there are 9 Forgotten champions, you are always going to find what you need throughout the game. Early game, you can run Warwick as a frontliner with Vayne as a carry. Stage 3 and 4 are perfect for Katarina too. Stage 4 and onward, you have Draven, Rise, and Viego. The only issue tends to be a weaker frontline, but you can always flex into additional units at level 7 and 8. Being a vertical trait, especially one with so many champions, it makes splashing in other traits very easy at higher levels. Rise opens the door for Mystic, Hecarim for Rel, and Mordekaiser pairs perfectly with Draven. Basically, you have a ton of options to play depending on what lobby you're in. Just make sure you're running 6 Forgotten, which usually consists of Draven, Rise, Thresh, Hecarim, Viego, and either Katarina for Assassin or Warwick to provide additional frontline. One more selling point for Forgotten is how flexible the items can be. Sure, you really want shadow items to make use of the trait, but you do have a lot of options. The only 2 items that are must-haves are Shadow Locket and Dark Blue Buff. Shadow Locket helps boost your frontline's defense, plus it's easily one of the best early game items in the game. Dark Blue Buff is of course for Rise, though keep in mind that his secondary stun duration was nerfed and is much shorter than before. But for Draven, you can run a plethora of items, such as both variations of several items like Infinity Edge, Bloodthirster, Ruinance, and Last Whisper. This lets you mix and match regular items and shadow items. Rise, outside of Dark Blue Buff, can use items like Morellonomicon, Guardian Angel, or Banshee's Claw. Viego tends to get any leftover items, while your frontline will use any defensive items that you happen to have. Overall, Forgotten is slightly weaker than they were in 11-12, but is still a dominant composition for the 11-13 meta. Let's move on to our composition coming in at number 2, Dawnbringer. First, let's point out that Karma was slightly nerfed, with her abilities damage going down a bit. She's still plenty strong as a carry, but to do well with Dawnbringers, particularly in the late game, you absolutely need Garen and good AP items on Karma. If you can fulfill those 2 requirements, then you're going to be good to go with Dawnbringer. Similarly to Forgotten, Dawnbringer has a lot of champions at various costs. Dawnbringer has one of the best early game boards with Gragas and Kha'Zix. This can also be translated into early parts of the mid game with Soraka, Riven, and Nidalee. Both Riven and Nidalee are fantastic 3-cost carries you can rely on during stage 3 and 4, making it much easier to transition to level 8 and find Karma and Garen. Dawnbringer also easily pivots into late game compositions if needed. In particular, there's either Invoker boards with Teemo carry or the Heimerdinger, Ivern, Volibear late game trio. The option to transition out of Dawnbringer is quite helpful considering how contested Dawnbringer is right now in the meta. So if you're in a position where you simply can't find Karma 2, you can instead pivot away from her as the carry. Overall, Dawnbringer is a solid trait throughout the whole game with a powerful late game board. Karma and Garen can easily 2v9 other boards, and it's not all that difficult to get to that position of the game considering how many options Dawnbringer has throughout the early and mid game. But keep in mind, the major downside to Dawnbringer is the reliance on Karma and Garen late game, as they will be heavily contested. One last aspect of Dawnbringer that's useful is you don't have to commit to 6 Dawnbringer since it's a vertical trait with multiple tiers. You can stay on 4 to flex in extra champions and traits such as Rel for more frontline or Mystic if the lobby is running a lot of AP compositions. You can also always stick to 6 Dawnbringer paired with Volibear and Ivern for more frontline. And with that, we move on to our last composition for our top 5 that's coming in at number 1, Redeemed. Look, Redeemed is crazy good right now. There are a lot of reasons that this trait is dominating the meta. One of the most important reasons is just how gosh darn flexible the composition can be when using Redeemed. There's 6 Redeemed boards using Vel'Koz carry or even Lux carry. There's 3 Redeemed using Varus with Pantheon. There's 3 Redeemed with Vel'Koz to flex in other traits. Well, you get the point. With multiple carry options, you're never in a bad position by committing to playing Redeemed. This makes it one of the easiest traits to use since the items are almost identical across the 3 potential carries since they all lean towards AP damage. The simple build to run will be using 6 Redeemed with Vel'Koz carry. Slap a Jeweled Gauntlet, Shojin, and any other damage item onto Vel'Koz, chances are you're going to be winning a lot of rounds without issue. Fiona and Rel provide a ton of frontline. Syndra throws would-be threats to Vel'Koz away, and Lux is borderline overpowered in her current state. But wait, there's more. Varus empowering Pantheon is also a viable build using very similar items on Varus as Vel'Koz. This allows for an easy pivot if you end up hitting a Vel'Koz 2 and aren't doing well with the Varus Pantheon combo. Then there's Lux, who again uses nearly the same items as Vel'Koz and is a viable option if you're unable to hit Vel'Koz 2. Basically, you can mix and match what you need each game based on what you're hitting, making redeem not only a powerful trait, but also one of the most flexible. All in all, if you're looking to play a composition with multiple variations that you can delve into and learn while also climbing in ranked, Redeemed is the best option in the current meta. That's going to be it for our top 5 compositions for patch 11.13. But before we go, we have a few honorable mentions to talk about. These are the builds that you can do well with, but are less consistent than the other top 5 comps. First up is Yasuo. Yasuo took a bit of a hit in 11.13, making him less viable as a late game carry. That said, he's still perfectly fine in the early and mid game. Just consider pivoting out of him once you've hit stage 5, as even committing to Yasuo 3 may not be enough to win rounds. Best composition to run with him is still Dragon Slayer for Nightbringer, which opens up the door to pivoting to Aphelios or Draven Mordekaiser board. It's not always a necessity, but make sure to keep the option open to pivot. Our other honorable mention this week is Abomination. Abomination is the epitome of inconsistency because it requires rather specific things to do well. In general, if you want to run it late game, you need an Abomination emblem. To do well with it in the early game, you need Nunu. If you want to run the Zyra variation, then you need Draconic no later than stage 2. Basically, there's a lot of ifs when it comes to running Abomination. That said, if you can get it running early and get a bit lucky in the mid game, it's a solid alternative to play in a meta dominated by vertical traits. That's going to be it for today's video, folks. Vertical traits are certainly dominating the meta right now, but at least there's a lot of viable compositions to choose from. But at the end of the day, if you're looking to just climb the ladder, we recommend Redeemed, Dawnbringer, or Forgotten. Let us know in the comments section below which compositions you're having the most success with in your ranked climb. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.